What a night that was. What an extraordinary night. How sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless Donald riled, as Shakespeare almost said. And it was almost Shakespearean. He would have appreciated the bloodlust that we saw explode in full public view on 2 separate social media sites last night. One owned by Donald Trump, one owned by Elon Musk. It was much speculated that the divorce between these two men, when it came, would be bloody. But I don't think anyone expected to see the equivalent of a thermonuclear reaction explode in real time in the speed that it did. When that moment finally came, it was every bit as vindictive, as petty, as operatic, as ridiculous, as stupid, as childish, and as absolutely predictable as we all thought that it might be. It just happened more quickly. In the space of a single night, Elon Musk went from being pretty much still an ally of Donald Trump's. It wasn't even a week ago, I think, that they were in the Oval Office having a sweet goodbye to each other, praising each other to the rafters, saying how enormously helpful the two men had been to each other, to within the space of a couple of hours, Elon Musk alleging that Donald Trump was in the Jeffrey Epstein files. And Donald Trump, for his part, threatening Musk with the removal of government and federal contracts. Musk, for his part, in a moment of high camp, choosing to respond to that by saying, "Be my guest. You'll lose access to the International Space Station." For his part, another absolutely dreadful night for Musk commercially, with Tesla shares down by $150 billion. This was an alliance of convenience, and it was an alliance of potency for as long as it lasted. Musk claimed that Trump would not have won the 2024 election without him. That's probably a stretch, but there is absolutely no doubt that Musk's money, he was by far the biggest political donor of any donor in the 2024 cycle, his money and his algorithm were enormously useful to Trump. It allowed him to dominate this conversation, the political ecosystem, in a way that the radical right have never done before and have done ever since. The views of the radical right, the MAGA right, promoted and amplified on Twitter every day, hour after hour. Musk's thoughts going directly, and Trump's as well, directly into our brains, even those of us who do not share their politics. The national conversation in the UK and US, inevitably shaped by the contours of their thinking. Cast your mind back to the extraordinary few weeks we had with the conversation around Asian grooming gangs, and Musk directly accusing of our Prime Minister of complicity in those events. It was potent, it was powerful, it was a synthesis between the economic and technological power of Silicon Valley and the political power and potency of the MAGA movement. It was unstoppable. For now, at least, it appears to have come to a shuddering halt. And what I would say is that many things about this can be true. 1, it's entertaining. 2, it's deeply dysfunctional with it in the way that the Trump core always was and was always going to be. C, this happens when a political project is about a force of personality rather than actual politics, something I'm going to talk about a bit more. D, it's pathetic. And E, they could still make up. Indeed, as you heard in the news bulletins just now, it looks like there's going to be some conversation between Musk and Trump to try and assuage and to soothe everything that has taken place. It is nonetheless a big moment for American politics and a big moment for the two men personally. And to some extent, it reflects the fact that Trump needs enemies. That is the sort of politician that Trump is. This town was only ever going to be big enough for one of them at any given point. That was inevitable. But also, given how he has vanquished Trump, he's vanquished so many of his enemies. The sort of politics that he needs, the Democrats are barely twitching in the road. His enemies within the Republican Party have long since acquiesced to him. Cultural elites in the United States basically now just keeping their head down and not opposing anything he said. A complete contrast with the first term. Complete contrast. And so in the end, the revolution eats its children. And these two massive titans of recent politics are set against each other. And I think there was something inevitable about that, not just because of the force of personality between the two men, but because of the sort of politics that Trump inhabits and possesses. And in that, I think we can see a parallel on a much smaller scale, admittedly, in our own politics. And the other big news that we saw overnight, which was the completely unexpected shock resignation of Reform Chairman Zia Youssef, a man who until not even a week ago, last Sunday, on Sunday with Lewis Goodall, he was on the air being put up by Reform to defend the party. Just listen to this. This is, as I say, it's not even a week ago. Zia Youssef sat in this studio. He was sat opposite in the chair from which I'm sitting right now, defending the party's record.
I do think the insane numbers of people, I mean, you just asked him, and I think his answer was very poor. We've got a ridiculous number of people still penetrating our borders on a daily basis. Yesterday, well north of 1,000, potentially a record. And we have now got confirmation that one of the people, at least, who came across was involved in a foiled terror plot. This is absolutely a national security emergency. And the fact that that has still not been described as such after 14 years of Tory rule and now almost a year of Labour rule is a catastrophe.
And now he's gone. He went last night saying that he no longer believes that it is a good use of his time to try and work as he was doing and devote so much of his time and indeed personal resources, he's a wealthy man, to the reform cause. This is a man who was hailed in exactly the same way that Donald Trump hailed Elon Musk by Nigel Farage as a star. A star is born, someone who is going to be the future of that sort of politics in the UK. There was lots of talk about his standing and becoming an MP. Presumably, if the polls are to be believed and we're to believe what Reform says about itself, he would have been in the cabinet. Now he's presumably still in the party, but certainly no longer party chairman. He was someone who was supposed to be professionalising the party and changing it and making sure that it was an election-winning machine. Indeed, was hailed for his part in the victory in the Runcorn by-election. He has gone, apparently, reportedly, over a disagreement with their newest MP, Sarah Potchin, bringing up the issue of banning the burqa at Prime Minister's questions this week, something that he called dumb, on Twitter, again, in full public view. Now, we can get into, and we are going to get into the ins and outs of that in this show, and we've got some breaking news on that we'll be able to bring you a little bit later as well. But for now, I just want to focus on what it says about these parties. You see, because for my money, obviously these are very different circumstances. The issues involved are extremely different. The fissure between Trump and Musk is about the so-called big, beautiful bill, the enormous spending bill that Trump is pushing through Congress, and the enormous debt that is going to add to the American national debt, which is already massive, something that Musk is very much opposed to. And indeed, guess what? The interests of Musk and Trump were never really aligned. They were never really aligned. In many ways, Musk is an old-school libertarian Republican figure, and Trump is a populist one. Trump's genius was to bind those two things together. And guess what? Under the pressures of government, they start to fall apart. But the thing that links Reform and Trump, between MAGA and Trump, is that fundamentally, this is a politics built around personalities and not ideas. This is a politics which is when you focus on one man, when one man's personality is so big, Farage here, Trump over there, it is corrosive. It burns everything that it sees. That is why Farage has fallen out with so many people over the years. In this case, not necessarily Youssef, but nonetheless, when you base a politics of populism, something being anti-system, of constantly railing against the elites, rather than with, say, the Labour or the Conservative parties or the old Republican Party or the Democratic Party. These are parties based on and anchored in ideas, real politics. It's not to say that the politics in these parties isn't there. There is politics there. But fundamentally, what they have become are vehicles for two men and their ambition. And it is therefore no surprise that the adhesive, the glue which binds normal parties together, doesn't apply here. They are to some extent based on chaos. Their entire shtick, their entire raison d'etre is to go in, to drain the swamp, to smash things up and start again. Guess what? That's chaotic. That is chaotic. And that is why populist forces, not always, but generally speaking, it is why populist forces fail once they get into government. Populist parties like this are brilliant at politics. They are brilliant at tickling the tummy of voters. They are brilliant at emoting. They are brilliant at saying to voters what they want to hear. And then when they get into office, that glue that bound them together, the anti-system, the two fingers, stick it up to you, that's gone. And what are you left with? Well, actually, what you're left with, very often, is mutual loathing and a sense in which actually you wake up and realize, hang on, lads, we don't really agree about anything. We don't agree about anything at all. And that is the real story about Elon Musk and Donald Trump. They don't really agree about anything. They came together at a particular moment, at a particular time, for very particular reasons. Some mutual interest. But fundamentally, Musk wanted more immigration. He wanted Chinese cars. He didn't want tariffs. He wanted to reduce the debt and the deficit. And fundamentally, Trump wants what's good for Donald Trump. And that was always going to yield instability and, in the end, fissure between the two men. I want to talk to you about what this says about populist politics, about these two parties, and whether actually, for all of the talk about this coming wave, when you consider that in the US and the UK, we are between 3.5 to 4 years from either general election in both places, doesn't this tell us that actually, for all our hype, they're unlikely to go the course? Because what you're dealing with is two deeply, deeply unstable forms of politics. You're dealing with groups of people who, when it comes down to it, can't govern. They can't even govern themselves, let alone the rest of the country.